Most people are not aware of who Floyd Council is, or that his name was, in part, the inspiration behind the wildly successful band called Pink Floyd. It is apparent that most wouldn't know that Floyd Council's music was a great influence to this famous group of white rockers from across the waters. His music stands as a tremendous testament to the blues legend and the influence of blacks in the music industry. It's also a testament that you never know where you just might find a bit of interesting history. It just might be in a little town called Sanford, North Carolina.
In the 1920s, blues music really caught fire in the United States. This form of music created vapors that were so intoxicating that they engulfed an entire nation. The blues was such an infectious style of music that it wafted across the Atlantic onto the shores of Europe. The European population was introduced to the blues by white performers such as the skiffle bands, which originated out of England. Also young groups like the Rolling Stones, The Who, the Yardbirds, the Animals, the Beatles, Fleetwood Mac, Eric Clapton, and others. During this time, a trend seemed to be emerging among the up-and-coming British rock bands. The trend would often use part of an American blues artist's name or catchphrases from their songs to create a unique name for their own bands. The Rolling Stones, for example, derived their name from a song called Catfish Blues, written by the famous blues artist Muddy Waters. The Yardbirds gleaned their name from the black jazz saxophonist Charlie Parker, whose nickname was the Yardbird. He mixed jazz with other musical genres such as blues, Latin, and classical.
However, it was in 1965 when a young inspired musician named Roger Syd Barrett, a cool and charismatic son of a university don, decided he would create a band of his own. His vision was perfect for the times and vice versa. Syd was the original creative force behind the band named Pink Floyd. The name he chose was derived from the given names of two blues musicians, Pink Anderson and Floyd Council, who were featured artists on a Blind Boy Fuller Piedmont blues record, of which Barrett had in his own collection. Not only was the Pink Floyd name steeped in the blues, but also their unique sound. It was Syd Barrett who led this band to its first precarious fame, while damaging himself irreparably along the way through reckless living and drug abuse. Although the Pink Floyd / Syd Barrett era lasted only 3 years from 1965 to 1968, it had a seducing and lasting impact on the world.
And we're traveling back in time across the Atlantic and riding the waves that eventually tide on the shores of America. We arrive on the Outer Banks of North Carolina and move inland towards the Piedmont. It's here that we find the lost treasure, the history that belongs exclusively to North Carolinians, a history that has been abandoned and neglected and is dangerously close to being erased from memory. What is this history, you ask? The life and times of Floyd Council Sr., just a man and his blues. He's the Floyd in this remarkably famous Pink Floyd band. Floyd Council Sr. was born in Chapel Hill, North Carolina on September 2nd, 1911. He and his brother Moses, John, were raised by their grandparents Martha Ann and Lauren Council. Due to the untimely death at a very young age of their parents Harry and Lizzie Council, Martha Ann and Lauren had 3 children of their own, Mary, Clyde, and Lou. This event not only increased the mouths that they had to feed, but it also thrust them into the roles of the counselors for these 2 orphan children.
With the help of family members like Jesse James Council, the brother of Lizzie Council, Note the same last name, Lizzie, Floyd's mother's maiden name, is also Council. They were able to keep these two boys occupied. Jesse James Council's home remedy for these two boys was music. Jesse James knew that music was food for the soul, and his passion for good music would serve as the gateway, which would introduce Floyd Council to what would become his lifelong calling. These two orphan boys were patiently taught to play the guitar by their uncle Jesse James Council, oftentimes on the front porch of their grandparents' home in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. This story is lovingly told by Floyd's first cousin, Pearl Council Cole. She is reminded of how her father, Jesse James, with persistence, would show Floyd and his brother Moses the chords, tabs, and rhythms that would soon catch fire in the heart of one of these young boys.
Yes, it was Floyd who would become the avid music pupil. He was so captivated by the melodies that he was able to extract from the guitar that it occupied every free moment of his time. Jesse James undoubtedly was a very proud uncle, realizing that this young boy was an excellent student whose talent would eventually exceed that of his own. In the words of Pearl Council Cole,
"After a while, Daddy and my brothers couldn't touch Floyd when it came to playing the guitar."
his mastery of the guitar was unequaled by anyone in his community. Apparently, for Floyd, music was a therapy that he chose to help him cope with the tragedy of losing his parents. The blues just seemed to fit him like a glove. Floyd used his music not only to entertain, but to tell his own story in the process, which promoted healing from within. But remember that it was the love that both he and his brother received from their family which brought them to a better place in life. This family understood that a lot of love, delicious home-cooked meals prepared by Grandma, and some good toe-tapping music could breathe new life into any bad situation.
As the years went on, so did Floyd's love for the blues and his guitar. Pearl Council Cole remembers that her cousin Floyd became an entrepreneur as a teenager when he made a deal with the owners of Siler's Grocery Store and the local A&P on Franklin Street in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. Floyd was asked to play his guitar outside these stores for money. These store owners believed this jaw-dropping, intoxicating music produced by Floyd would bring in the black shoppers, thereby which both Floyd and the shop owners would benefit from the good music and the economic gain. In the 1930s, Floyd Council became a man and married a girl named Pearl from Chapel Hill. They moved to Sanford, North Carolina, and rented a home on Hudson Street, right off Washington Avenue, better known as Jack Looker's Bottom. He landed a job as a long-distance truck driver for the Sanford Tobacco Company and Sanford Furniture Company, delivering goods between Georgia and Tennessee. He and his wife Pearl started their family in Sanford. Together they had 3 sons, James, Moses, John, and Floyd Jr., and 1 daughter, Martha. In an exclusive interview, Floyd Jr. revealed to the Heritage Foundation Incorporated that his father, after a long trip to Georgia or Tennessee, couldn't wait to get back to his family and his guitar upon his return home. Floyd Jr. remembers that often the older people would comment on him and say, "Boy, your daddy can pick that box." This term simply meant that he was a very skilled guitar player. Floyd Jr. also shared that his father had such a following that people would often come to their house at 2 a.m. in the morning, knock on the door, and demand that Floyd Council Sr. engage in a jam session that would last until time for his father to go back to work. This was clearly a love for music that was more than just a passing fancy. It was a lifelong desire that grew into something that even Floyd Council Sr. could never have imagined. The interview went on to reveal that often on Friday and Saturday nights there would be an event called the Chillin' Strut, in which the music of Floyd Council Sr. was the main attraction for the evening. This was in essence a block party with lots of okey-doke, alcohol, dancing, and yes, chitlins, or as we say in the South, chitlins. One of the more popular songs that Floyd Sr. would play at the Strut was called Runaway Man Blues. This particular song talks about a man who left his home and his sweetheart, and the fact that he's sure she's going to miss him something terrible while he's away. But just in case he stays gone a little too long and she takes interest in someone else, he's gonna get him a razor and a blue steel gun. And if he finds another man in his house when he returns home from his trip, he's gonna cut him if he stands there and shoot him if he runs.
The blues style of music has acquired a certain stigmatism, and the common misconception is that it is exclusively about pain and suffering. However, upon closer observation, we see that there is quite a wide range of emotions, including joy, anger, and indifference. Blues artists sing from individual as well as social perspectives, and this alone covered the emotional spectrum. During the early 1900s, the blues gave rise to such greats as Robert Johnson, king of the Delta Blues, who described the blues as a low-down achy chill, who was also believed to have sold his soul to the devil to be able to play the guitar like no other. 1873 through 1958, one of the most influential American songwriters, was named Father of the Blues. The blues style can be traced all the way back to the 1890s, about 25 years after the Civil War officially ended slavery in the United States. This newfound freedom did not change the economic conditions of the majority of African Americans. However, it did have a tremendous effect on the mindset of those born into freedom. This new mindset obviously helped to develop for the first generation born outside of slavery a new music that would more accurately reflect their view of the world and the social situations in which they lived.
My daddy used picks to play his guitar, and he could call your name with that guitar.
Says Floyd Jr.
My dad's Uncle Jesse James and his friends were having a jam session once, and they told my dad that he should learn to play the guitar in Vassal Pool if he was going to play with the big boys. My dad was determined to learn to play in Vassal Pool. When he was sure of himself, he went back to show his uncle and his friends that he had mastered this skill. However, he wasn't fond of the Vassal Pool chord, so he went back home, tuned his guitar in C, went back to his uncle and his friends, and outplayed them all. My daddy told me not to learn to play the guitar in Vassal Pool. That's for the big boys.
Says Floyd Jr. Vassal Pool is a very difficult chord to play, and it takes real skill to master this style.
I remember my daddy singing songs like Old Swanee River, I Got the Key to the Highway, When the Moon Peeps Over the Mountain, and Baby I'll Be on My Way. Willie Neal Johnson, 1935 to 2001, was a gospel singer who became known as Country Boy for his style that was rooted in the blues. He made a couple of songs my daddy loved to sing called Little Wooden Church and 12 Gates of the City.
Says Floyd Jr. Although there seems to be no records available which exclusively feature Counsel's work, the CD entitled Carolina Blues features 6 songs which he recorded, entitled I'm Grievin' and I'm Worryin', I Don't Want No Hungry Woman, Looking for My Baby, Pouring Ain't Got a Dime, Runaway Man Blues, and Working Man Blues. According to the 1969 interview, Floyd Council Sr. stated that he had recorded 27 songs over his career, 7 of them backing Blind Boy Fuller, who was one of the most recognized Piedmont bluesmen in North Carolina. Fuller's series of complete recorded works contain many songs in which Council played guitar. Fuller died in 1941 and is buried in the Grove Hill Cemetery located in Durham, North Carolina.
There's a common theme that is apparent from the exclusive interviews given to the Heritage Foundation Incorporated by Floyd Council Jr. and Pearl Council Cole. That is that Floyd Council Sr. was a very colorful man who not only acquired fans wherever he played, but his fame and influence traveled further than he would ever have believed possible. To the ears of that young Englishman known as Syd Barrett, the founder of the Pink Floyd Band. Floyd Council Sr. suffered a stroke in the late 1960s, which partially paralyzed his throat muscles and slowed his motor skills, but did no significant damage to his cognitive abilities. Floyd Council Sr., now having to use a cane to maintain stability, was reduced to a shadow of his former self. However, he continued to play the guitar, but now just for his own enjoyment. Floyd Jr., the last living member of this family, still possesses the cane that was made for his father by one of his father's friends after his stroke in 1976. This beautifully hand-carved wooden cane serves as a reminder to Floyd Jr. of his father's struggles, as well as his triumphs. He takes pride in knowing that this man and his blues was not only the driving force, but also the inspiration that put the Floyd in Pink Floyd. Floyd Council Sr., 64 of Sanford, died early Sunday morning, 5/9/1976, at North Carolina Memorial Hospital in Chapel Hill. He survived by two sons, Floyd Council Jr. and John Council of Sanford, one daughter, Miss Martha McQuay of Sanford. The body is at the Horton Funeral Home, where arrangements are incomplete. The funeral for Floyd Council, Wednesday at 4 p.m. at McCormick Chapel Church. Burial will follow at the White Oak Cemetery. The family will receive friends tonight at the Horton Funeral Home from 7 until 8 p.m.
Floyd Council Sr.'s health continued to decline after his stroke, and on May 12, 1976, he died from cardiac arrest at his home in Sanford, North Carolina. He was eulogized at the McCormick Chapel on Boykin Avenue near Jack Luker's Bottom and is buried at White Oak Cemetery, located just outside the city limits in Sanford, North Carolina, at 1264 Lower Moncure Road. Now considered one of the many abandoned and neglected cemeteries in the state, through the acquisition of this cemetery in 2013 by the Heritage Foundation Incorporated, which through grants and donations restores honor and dignity to abandoned and neglected cemeteries, we have brought this story to the forefront. It is our sincere hope that by telling this story, we can raise awareness and preserve the memory and historical fortitude that can so easily slip away into the cracks of history. Sanford, North Carolina, home to a man and his blues. Who put the Floyd in Pink Floyd? Well, now you know.
Up there, laying on my cold iron bed. Yeah, I've laying up there, laying on my cold iron bed. When I received the news, the woman I love was dead. I didn't have no money, then I could not go home. I didn't have no money, then I could not go home. Then I walked in my window, and I dropped my head to moan. Lord, Lord, woman I love you dead and gone. Lord, went down